Good morning. I bet most of you were familiar with that story that Judy read from us from Matthew. I remember, I still have an image of the children's book, the Arch book series where I learned that story when I was a kid. This is not that story, but I found this book down in my basement, and the title, The Boy Who Gave His Lunch Away, is the one that I remember. This is the story where Jesus goes to a deserted place and is followed by the crowds there. This place is so deserted that there is not a McDonald's for miles around. And he teaches and heals people, and it's coming evening and it's time to eat. The disciples come to him and say, "How are we supposed to feed all these people?" And Jesus says, "Well, what have you got?" And they said, "Well, there's a kid here who has 5 loaves and 2 fishes for his lunch." So Jesus takes that, everybody sits down, they pass the food around, and there is so much food that there are 12 baskets left over. 5,000 people. Is that how you remember that story? Me too. But that's not exactly how the story is in the book of Matthew that Judy read. And it's not exactly that way in the book of Mark or Luke or John. We know that this is an important story of Jesus' ministry because it's one of the few stories that appears in each of the 4 Gospels. But it appears a little differently in each one. For instance, John is the only one who has a little boy who brought his lunch and brings it up to share it. So I'm not so much interested in how the stories are different. Sometimes people sit in different groups. There's different numbers of people listed. I'm interested in how these stories are the same because I think their similarities give us some clues about what was important to the gospel writers and what might be important to us. So first of all, let me unpack some things about the society that Jesus lived in. In 21st century America, we have a growing problem among the working poor and the poor of food uncertainty. This means families, and especially women with children, who aren't sure where their next meal is coming from. During the summertime and on weekends, when children don't get food assistance at school, sometimes these families go with only 1 or maybe 2 meals a day. And those meals, probably not locally grown organic produce that's cooked at home. Those meals are mostly packaged, processed, or fast food. It's difficult to eat healthy in this country if you're poor. In Jesus' society, food uncertainty was a way of life for almost all of the population. Almost all of the population was poor and didn't know where their next meal was coming from. The other thing in this story is often in Bibles this is titled The Feeding of the 5,000 or Jesus Feeds the Multitudes. In all of the gospel accounts, and you might have noticed at the end of this one, it says that Jesus fed 5,000 men, including women and children. In Jesus' society, men were the only ones who counted, so they were the only ones who got counted. So the number of people that was fed that day was probably more like 20,000 people. And the women and children knew that the expectation was that they would get whatever was left over after the men had eaten. So that would be as if the Creekside Fellowship team was planning a meal and said, let me see, I think we'll probably have about 20 men there. A note to the fellowship team, I wouldn't recommend this approach. If you've ever been hungry, even for a day or two, you know that having enough to eat is a big deal. For people who are chronically hungry, not just food uncertainty, but not enough food for most of the time, Having enough food is the difference between being able to work and not being able to work. It might literally be the difference between life and death. So forget about theology and redemption and salvation. A Messiah who can feed you can literally save your life. And note that Jesus is sharing this bread not only with those who confess his name and believe in him. Jesus gives this bread away equally to everyone. And not only the men, not only the people who counted, who society says are important, but to the women and children, the poor and the overlooked. Keep that in mind. I'm going to come back to that. Second of all, reading through these stories for what they have in common, I noticed something that I missed in my Sunday school class. In every version, before anyone is fed, Jesus takes the bread, blesses it, breaks it, and shares it. Now, I'm sure the disciples saw this all the time. This had to be an everyday occurrence for them. But the Gospels record some very significant points in Jesus' ministry when he takes bread and breaks it and shares it. He does this with his disciples at the Last Supper that he has with them before his crucifixion. And following Jesus' resurrection, Jesus is walking on the road to Emmaus with two of his followers, and they walk for hours talking and teaching, and it's not until supper time when he takes the bread and blesses it and breaks it and gives it to them that they recognize him. Oh, that's Jesus. We've seen him do that 100 times. He really is alive. Blessing bread, breaking it, and sharing it is a simple and nearly universal symbol of hospitality and friendship. It's so familiar that we use the phrase breaking bread to mean any kind of table fellowship. I believe that there are even deeper levels of meaning in these biblical stories. Bread is a symbol of the body of Christ, blessed, broken, and shared with us. And even more miraculous, we as friends and followers of Jesus Christ are the bread that is meant to be blessed, broken, and shared with the world. It's the way that we continue the work and the presence of Jesus Christ in the world today. What if the miracle of the loaves and fishes didn't end with thousands of people on those deserted hills, but is supposed to continue in the way we live as Christians? I've heard it said by one of my seminary professors, among other folks, that the miracle of this story is not that there was a supernatural transformation of the loaves and fishes so that they fed thousands of people. The miracle was that one person was willing to step up and share what he had. And once he did that, then everybody else could take out the bread that they had hidden away and were willing to share it with everybody else. And when everyone was willing to share, there was enough for everybody. I believe this is a both and not an either-or scenario. However we understand these stories, we are blessed by the miraculous power of God through Jesus Christ. And we are blessed by examples of generosity around us. Either way, or both ways, we are blessed. And even a cursory self-examination of our lives will reveal two truths. We are blessed and we are broken. We are blessed because we have been made in the image of God. And we are broken because we are human. We are blessed because we have been given this wonderful creation from God. And we are broken because we have abused and exploited it. We are blessed when we have abundant bread for ourselves, and we are broken when there are children in our communities who don't know where their next meal is coming from. A sense of the abundance of this bread is the final thing that all of these stories have in common. In every story, there are 5 loaves and 2 fishes. The number 7 had special significance in Jewish thought. And in every story, there are 12 baskets of scraps that are gathered up when everyone has eaten their fill. 12 baskets. 12 was a number that signified fullness and completion, a number of wholeness and balance. 12 baskets of bread is a lot. And certainly it's miraculous to think of 5 loaves stretching far enough to feed 20,000 people and still having 12 baskets left over. But it didn't just feed them. It left them satisfied. In order for hungry people to leave leftovers, there had to be more than enough for everybody. An abundance of bread. And maybe this abundance overflowed into their attitudes as well, because 12 baskets of bread suggests that nobody was hiding the leftovers to save for later. As soon as one person starts keeping more than their share, then those baskets would have been empty. Nothing kills abundance faster than an attitude of scarcity, an attitude that says, I'm going to keep a little bit more than I need, even if it means that somebody else has to have a little bit less. Blessed, broken, shared. I don't think we can dodge our identity as both blessed and broken. But the challenge of the gospel is this. Is there enough to share? Do we have enough to share? Are we enough to share? I want to give you some scenarios, and I don't mean to suggest that these are simple or have obvious answers. I know that they don't. We probably won't all agree, but I invite you to consider these questions through the lens of the gospel story and how it might continue in us today. Your daughter brings 2 friends home from school. Unexpectedly, they stay through the dinner hour. Do you invite them to stay and eat with you even though you weren't expecting more people? Is there enough to share? Your church puts out a call for school kits to be sent to children around the world who have no school supplies. You know there are children in your own neighborhood, maybe in your own home, who don't have all the things they need for school. Is there enough to share? A congregation in the area needs a place to worship and asks to use the Creekside facility. Is there enough to share? There are refugee children from Central America asking for admittance to the United States. Is there enough to share? The Church of the Brethren in Nigeria is pleading for fasting and prayer for their kidnapped girls and other victims of religious extremism. Is there enough to share? Rob Bell, the creator of the Numa videos and author of the book Love Wins, says, "Be careful about asking God to feed the hungry if you have more bread than you need." A prescription for sharing should come with a warning label. There might be side effects. we could get taken advantage of. We might have less for ourselves. We might find out things about ourselves and what's important to us that we'd rather not know. I know that sharing means taking risks, but I believe that miracles are more likely to happen when we're outside of our comfort zones. Maybe the miracle that Jesus has for us is that we'll look at what we have and realize that there's been enough to share all along. Maybe the miracle will be that we will be able to share our own brokenness and realize together that we still are blessed. Maybe we'll share God's concern for the poor, a realization that every person has value in the eyes of God. Maybe we will become the bread of life for someone who didn't even know they were starving. As a blessed and broken people, I pray that we will continue to find ways to share in the example of Jesus, offering the simple loaves and fishes that we have, modeling generosity, experiencing abundance, and sharing in the life of love and service that is Jesus' gift to the whole world. Amen.